So after watching a mysterious video, you have 7 days to live. That's basically the story of the Ring, or Ringu in the Japanese version. I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hello.
And
it's my spooky hello there.
So I think the thing that we've kind of covered in different times, different ways is, what is it about, that kind of horror that really taps into our fears? Because I feel like in some ways, what's kind of we've considered a subgenre of J-horror really kind of comes at it from an aspect of culture and stuff. So I thought that that's like kind of, one of the things that's particular about what I think why it kind of has evolved as a subgenre of horror itself. And I think that's really an interesting question, like how culture doesn't seem to kind of have the same, or maybe in some ways it does have the same influence in regular horror, but just not as like kind of it's not as obvious, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think every culture has their own ghost stories. So you can draw on a different well, so to speak, of stories for stuff, because obviously everything gets reinvented and retold a lot of the time in movies and books. So, we're just seeing a different set of those with things like Ringu. And I mean, what they originally have based the story on is a story from 1741 of Bansho Sarayashiki, if I'm saying that right, which is very much a sort of a story based around the society of the time, which is where a samurai falls in love with a servant girl, and she always sort of throws off his advances, so he tricks her and he ends up throwing her down a well. And you can hear her ghost counting on basically he tricks her by she's responsible for counting 10 plates, and he gets rid of one, and then she gets blamed for losing one of the plates. So you can hear her ghost counting the plates down, as she's trying to look for them. So, it's a very similar kind of theme in that you've got this girl who's been sort of hard done by and thrown down a well. And there's also this sort of numerical counting element as well. So, but that's obviously a very, very old kind of story. And that's not the only one, as we'll go into later, that this draws on. That's very specific to the country.
Yeah, it's funny how the Korean horror is kind of evolving and stuff, and it's kind of definitely taking on its own kind of flavor, and a lot of it is more modern, I guess, so to speak, and stuff. That it's kind of so. In other words, I feel like J-horror was a reflection of the times for Japan, and then now it's kind of evolving as Korean horror is kind of like a lot of things that are thematic to their society, during these kind of current times and stuff. And I think that's another kind of interesting thing of like how these subgenres are evolving as well.
And I think as well, it's there's different cultural stuff that comes across in the style of the filming as well. Ringu is a very different horror movie from anything that had come out of the US at that point in time. American movies tend to be more demonstrative and sensationalist, and there's lots of jump scares all the way through them, and people blood, and this is very kind of quiet, kind of introspective, moody and dark and tense, and and it doesn't sort of follow any of the typical beats that a horror movie at the same time would have done in the US.
Yeah, Scream was the movie, I think, that kind of like put it, really overtly, hey, these are the rules of like, American horror stuff, and kind of like parodied it. And I think what happened with, J-horror was they basically said, hey, we're going to come up with a new set of, rules, and these are our rules for kind of, this, and then that's kind of really what's kind of kicked off a whole, kind of generation of, the J horror and stuff. And I think that's the thing that kind of what's interesting was that, like, sometimes when you kind of go in your own path, you can kind of basically, create your own set of rules.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's always kind of interesting in that, one of the sort of urban myth genre of horror movie was more or less kind of, I don't know if there even was one before Ringu at all. But this idea that, you can broadcast a threat into society and then you're kind of like beholden unto that, regardless of what you can do. I think that kind of reflects a little bit of like maybe a pressure from society, and that you're forced down one particular direction in life, and this is almost like a sort of a horror version of that, maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting one, but
yeah, I think with that's definitely like a good segue into of course the original in 1998, and here we have director Hideo Nakata in a film that, like, basically, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit already, that like launched this whole subgenre, because, like, after that, like, there was like multiple kind of different J horror films that like we'll be touching on over this next few weeks and stuff. And in fact, one of the ones that another one that he made, Dark Water, is one of the ones that we'll cover as well and stuff. But in this particular one, we have a single mother who's struggling with their career and stuff, raising a son. And I think that's the other thing that's interesting, is that, like, kind of like related to the subtlety you're talking about, it's, basically presenting like a idea, or, kind of, whether you call it a theme or not, that we start seeing, like, how traditional Japanese families are, basically like kind of this, two parents and they're raising kids and stuff like that. And here, like, this is one of the, films that, like, just basically shows, like, kind of the realities, if you will, of, like, kind of life in the, more current times and stuff. And, like, we also kind of course, get into technology, which is, like, kind of another key element of all this, where it's not only, basically a thing that's kind of part of the story, but it's, like, really, like, it is a tool of the supernatural. I mean, it's, it's VHS tape that is the, the way that, like, this force is, like, kind of, basically spreading its evil and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that device is so clever, because, I mean, you can look at this, even the title of this. I mean, obviously this is based on the book as well. The book from 1991 by Kiki Suzuki, also called Ring. But I guess it originally made sense because when you were reading the book, probably the phone call may have been the scariest thing when you're reading the book, hence the name Ring. But it has lots of sort of other connotations, because we know it's the symbolism of the well.
Right.
But also I kind of, and you can also look at it simply from the case of, like, this, what originally sort of kills Sadako is a sort of a family betrayal, if you will. So that kind of ring of trust within a family is kind of broken. But also, and it's interesting you talk about sort of technology and the supernatural, because I feel this film is like a complete sort of segue point between both, in a way. It's like you have a kind of a fear of technology, and you have what I would sort of, if a ring is also a halo or an aura of light. And part of what this goes back to is this idea of filming ghosts or taking photographs of ghosts and things like this, kind of aura photography and all these kind of things. It's it kind of takes something, that very old kind of spiritual practice from, like, the 1900s, and kind of updates it in a way. So it's kind of like this nice sort of juxtaposition of both of those things, but I think definitely it's a horror movie about horror movies. That's the way I see it, because some of the myths that abound with other horror movies, like, oh, when people went and saw this, they were sick, or this person fainted, and all this. Those are all the same kind of urban myths that go along with simply the act of going to watch a horror movie.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely, like you said, the Ring itself, becomes such a deep part about it, that, I tried to find something about, like, kind of the idea of, circles in Japanese culture. There's this actual Zen Buddhist practice of drawing circles and stuff, called Enzo and stuff. And it's also a key part about, this martial art core, like Kido, which I think we talked a little bit about before.
Yeah.
Because that was like one of the things that I really kind of practiced, like in the 90s thereabout too, ironically, and stuff. We kind of also like talked a little bit about in Watchmen and stuff, how there's something about like kind of the circle in terms of like when you have it with as a plot device and stuff, that at different times it feels like there's more of like a sense of completion too to the story, like but with this kind of ironic part that meanwhile you can also have this openness. So it makes that connected to the story. Is on one hand, like the cycle's completed right in these 7 days, and but meanwhile, because major spoiler, because she makes copies, like it opens it up to like then like kind of where the curses pass on and stuff, and so so it's interesting how like the circle is like kind of completed in one sense, but yet it's kind of like passed on, and then so this is kind of this idea that because of her having created that copy, it starts off another circle and stuff, and then so meanwhile, and then of course because she's like creating the copy with her son, she's like opening up yet another circle and stuff too, and it just goes on and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that this is what's really intriguing to me about this movie, is the technological aspect of it, is because the novel was actually, it more explicitly states that what happens is Sadako is raped by a psychiatrist in a sanitarium who had smallpox, and what she's created is a weird kind of psychic transmittable version of a virus that then gets sort of passed on through the tape. But what's interesting is so it actually is like described like a kind of a psychic virus in the book, and the Korean version of the movie is actually called the Ring virus. So that's kind of interesting that it has this kind of replicating quality. But this also is interesting for me in a time that you've got this idea of media that is mimetic, a mimetic replication of media, and this kind of like a weird sort of prediction of what comes later on in the internet. So that was a really kind of interesting step in terms of how they view technology. And I mean, like I say, this one is what I think is really clever about this is that you as the viewer, by the act of observing this, you're actually, it feels like you're running the same risk as the characters, because you get to watch the tape as well.
I was going to say.
Which is, so that's what I mean by it's like a horror movie about horror movies. It's like you are, just like there, you're almost like watching someone watching a horror movie, which is again is a very kind of meme-like way of watching a movie. And just as like the fear kills the characters, you kind of feel like, oh, I shouldn't get too afraid or it might kill me too. There's this subconscious thing going on, and that's a kind of aside from being like a kind of a really intriguing voyeuristic quality in that you really want to see the tape when you're watching it. You really want to watch whatever they're seeing. But it also kind of, it's a real sort of throwback to Invasion of the Body Snatchers and some of those kind of 50s horror movies. Because if you remember in that one, they were saying like, don't show emotions, otherwise they'll come and get you. And so don't scream, don't cry. And he does this, he does that nice fourth wall break at the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers where he's speaking to the audience saying, don't show this or you'll get, or they'll come and get you. And this has a similar thing, but for this, it's almost like this is a very kind of updated version, and this is almost like some weird sort of ominous prediction of the future, in that Sadako is coming out of 2 dimensions into 3D space.
Oh, right.
And I kind of feel like this is a prediction of what we're kind of facing in the future. You know, our horror won't be on a 2D screen anymore. It's going to be in virtual reality or projected in holograms.
Oh, right.
And so in a way, I kind of feel this is marking that, almost like the end. In a way, Sadako coming out of that screen represents the end of 2-dimensional media in a way. Yeah,
that's a really interesting kind of angle on that, because I hadn't thought about how after that, right? Like what I'm thinking about is the fact that like around that time period when the movie came out, that was like the decline of VHS, and at that point we're shifting towards like what's called even more advanced kind of video and stuff like that, streaming video, and then like where like it's almost in a way that like like the movie itself is an anachronism already, because of the fact that like like now like who uses VHS, right, and stuff, and and it's almost like this idea of like an old technology that it's left there and it might come back to bite us or something like that. It's almost like you think VHS is dead. Well, be careful what you stick in your video player, And like you said, like that aspect of like kind of don't watch this and stuff. It kind of like really echoes like kind of that feeling you have right as a kid when like kind of somebody's telling stories around the campfire. Like kind of like within all like as the story ends, right? Like kind of and like kind of the whoever's the storyteller is like kind of like, oh, watch out, like kind of you're kind of looking over your shoulders, kind of wondering like is this kind of ghost, because I remember like specifically my grandmother telling a ghost story that was very much had that kind of feel and stuff, and it was like kind of one of those like don't be a bad kid, like kind of or this ghost is gonna come out of the toilet, like kind of that kind
exactly, right. Take every sort of safe thing in your household and suddenly make it a real life and death threat. That's sure to like keep your child awake at night. So like, if you're a bad kid, something might crawl out from under your pillow and
right,
and it's just terrible. And a TV is so pervasive, right? It's in everybody's home. So we all have a TV. And I can guarantee, like, I mean, this is similar. I mean, Steven Spielberg with Poltergeist kind of tapped into this as well. This idea that, it was more subtly done in Poltergeist and not as connected to, I think, media and the idea of watching a horror movie. But this idea that you have this kind of flickering sort of thing in our room that almost feels like it's still, the technology of television is very unintuitive. It feels like a kind of a disembodied reality that kind of sits in our living room that projects these sort of this simulation of life that's small, and it's like a bit like sort of Willy Wonka, in that respect with Mike TV. But you know what I mean? It's like it has that sort of weird disconnection with reality.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the things that really also like kind of striking about it is just like kind of I can't think of a movie before that where like within the film literally like kind of breaks the fourth wall and stuff like that. And that like kind of was like kind of one of the things that really struck me the first time, that image, right? I can remember the first time seeing that, it's kind of like, whoa, that's kind of like trippy, kind of that's the first thing that kind of came across, and it just kind of stuck with me, like kind of just, I think it was I don't even know, it might have been the English version that I saw first and stuff, but it was just that particular image that then like we can like you can't unsee it, I guess.
No, I mean, it was such a powerful image that when it came out, I just remember my mind was completely blown when I first saw that in the Ring. It was just and I think what's so effective about the Japanese version is, again, the style of the movie, because it's so it's so kind of quiet and introspective and dark, interestingly enough, but you are put in quite you're not jumping up and you're not scared. You're actually in a very, because you're interested in the mystery of what's actually happened to Sadako and whether they'll solve this mystery within the time period.
Right.
That you're actually in quite a sort of quiet and observant place when you're watching that movie. And so when that scene finally comes, it's based on this idea that you are an observer watching the movie, and it's done so slowly and effectively that it really does just creep you out, because it's really that fourth wall break. And if you feel like you're there in that living room with them, because you're in such a kind of a focused state of mind at that point.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that like this movie does really well, is just suck you into the, like the race against time element, right? Like we're really conscious of kind of that time element, because it's, every other, kind of frame, like kind of, is showing like the kind of the countdown of days. And I think that, like kind of, we really feel like kind of, and I think that's another thing that like is striking about it, is that you really have that pressure that kind of is building, and we're really like kind of, like rooting for them to kind of solve things in time and stuff like that. And, overall, like kind of, the ex-husband, and this, wife, or excuse me, mother reporter, stuff like that. They're kind of like, even though that like, they're estranged and all that kind of stuff, but we feel like, like also like the sense of hope that maybe, along with like, solving this mystery, they might, get back together, kind of the whole happy ending kind of thing and stuff like that. So it's like kind of this mix of like emotions where like, the more immediate thing is this pressure against time, and stuff like that, but also there's kind of like this hope that maybe, like kind of, things will work out for them in the end. I think that's like kind of it's a subtle thing, but it's like, I feel like besides like kind of being a subplot, it's also, I think, this this sense that like, we have for, like it's a little bit childish, I guess, in a way, but it's yet this this sense of like kind of, maybe like kind of, like the broken family will be mended as well through, what's happening, in this movie and stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You think under the pressure of crisis and impending death in a few days,
right,
you might be able to just look over, look past the little things and mend those bridges. But he's quite a nihilistic character, though, Ryuji. He's sort of just, I mean, there's the scene where they're really just sort of talking about it, and they're at the inn, and he's sort of saying, she's sort of pleading with him, take care of Yoichi once I'm gone, and he's just like, maybe it'd be better if we were all just dead. And it's like, great, that's really what you want to hear in a crisis. So yeah,
there's definitely like a kind of stoicism to him, like totally. You've done before. And oh, by the way, it's funny how we couldn't kind of mention stuff like that. The actor playing Ryuji, the ex-husband, stuff like that, is actually, of course, from Westworld and stuff like that. Yeah.
And a few other, other stuff as well. I've seen him in quite a few stuff. But yeah, he's great at doing kind of stoic, sort of vaguely menacing characters. But I think for me, what I really, the underlying theme for me of Ring is this idea that, when you watch a movie, it's not an entirely passive act.
No.
By us empathizing with movie characters, we're kind of giving these creations life. And I think that kind of the reaching out is kind of like, it's a version of that. It's sort of a symbolic visual version of that. And the other thing that really strikes me about that whole sequence is that, in a way, if you're thinking about this as a form of media that has a life of its own, and it's kind of a conscious media that wants to be replicated, that's almost kind of like this weird birth scene, in a way, is another way of looking at it. Because it's almost like Sadako's virus is being sort of born out of the TV. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, the father's called Noah. And there's all these shots of like, well, he's not in the US one anyway. Right. But, and these shots of the sea, there's obviously some kind of biblical connection they've thrown in that one. But anyway, that's the remake, I should say. But
Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like in a way, going back to the idea of circles, stuff like that, we're kind of like, um, this is like a dark version of the cycle of life and stuff because, like the idea of, kind of fatherhood, kind of passing on things to like kind of the next generation and stuff. We have like kind of in a way, because of the, of broken families, stuff like that, there's kind of like disruption of that, cycle and everything. And yet, like, what, on the one hand, like kind of, Ryuji's kind of, again, major spoiler, like, is sadly, killed by, like kind of the, because he watches the, a copy of the film, which is kind of like we'll get into like kind of the interesting kind of difference there, and then like the towards the end, then we're left with the idea that like what she's likely going to do is to make a copy with the son, and then have the father, like kind of like the grandfather be watching it, like here's this kind of kindly old man, right, that like like kind of is taking the boy, catching fish and all that kind of stuff. And it's almost like we're, I don't know, like that the price of like kind of I don't the this is going to be like a sacrifice, I guess, of, if you will, of like kind of this grandfather stuff, right, to kind of continue on, the manhood and stuff like that. And I'm kind of wondering in a way, like what's that really saying then, that
I know, right? Yeah, I hadn't considered the idea that she would have made the grandfather watch it to save the son, but yeah, it makes sense. Yeah,
I mean, granted, like what's called, you would hope that like she would have somebody else watch it and stuff, but it's because like they're, the way they had the film, like kind of showing them driving off and stuff like that. I had the sense of that, like they were going to be showing it to the grandfather and stuff. Like kind of, I mean, that was kind of like what in my mind, I thought was kind of the what it was alluding to. It didn't spell it out that way, but I felt like that was kind of like the thing that we're hinting at.
Yeah, no, and I think there's very much this case in both versions that it's the fathers, through their sort of inability to deal with the children, that are the ones who tend to be killed. Because I mean, in Sadako's original father, in Japanese version, is the one who kills her, right? If I got that right. And through sort of persuasion, you can say, similar sort of thing in the remake. But also, I mean, Ryuji, by being a workaholic, not really a father, he gets the wrath of Sadako. And what's interesting is that he's the one who's the most intuitive and aware of what the story is and how it's going to play out. So there is this kind of thing of failed fatherhood all the way through it, I think, and that would make sense that the grandfather, through not very much fault of his own, may be the next father to face the fate.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it's this loophole that like really is what kind of gets them, so to speak, in the end, because we had this again, like I feel like we're just giving spoilers left and right. So if you have, like that's why we try to warn you guys, before we get into these, that like we're gonna be just basically going into all the different directions of the film and stuff. And for this one in particular, it's this idea that like it seemed like they kind of solve things, so to speak, by releasing the spirit. Like kind of it's like one of those things that like almost it's been done in some different horror movies where that like because the spirit is at peace and therefore everything's fine and stuff like that. And so that was of course led to the false ending where like the kind of the loophole turns out that like she kind of has to go back, wait a minute, like why am I still alive and stuff. And that's something of course we'll see in the remake and everything. But I think that's like kind of that's a major kind of aspect about this too, is like kind of that like you don't solve things by just simply like kind of doing things that like seem like kind of the good or that like maybe like kind of the nice ghost stories kind of is what saves everybody and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's this, and what's clever about it is you think you know, a classic kind of ghost story as it's portrayed in movies, that once you figure out what the ghost's problem is, everything's cool.
Yeah.
But this one, you know, it's like this idea, it's a ring, it keeps going, you know, regardless of, So yeah, it's, it is a very, very much a sort of an interesting, and like I say, a very modern take on it, this idea of a kind of a viral ghost in a way, which actually, maybe I should point out a few differences with the novel, because there are, one of the things that is different is that the two main protagonists in the novel are actually two men, and and one of them has a daughter, and it's a kind of a reversal there from the movie. But I think in that respect, the movie kind of actually it basically brings home more the failings of fatherhood, and it becomes a much more sort of female focused movie as a result. But in a way that's kind of, I think that sort of heightens more this idea of, you know, the almost child femme fatale, who's the killer, and which kind of builds on things like The Exorcist, which used a similar sort of thing of like, how can a little girl be dangerous? Well, you know, she's been possessed, and this one, she can literally just wish people dead. So and I should point out, I never actually say to viewers, watch out for spoilers. I just tend to just talk about stuff, and John's very good about sort of saying this, but so yeah, he already said it. But also the other thing that is different in the novel is that Sadako is actually intersex, and that's the reason why the doctor kills her, because he can't deal with that, and he's the one that actually throws her down the well.
Yeah, I mean, that's in a way, you know, like kind of, you were talking about the virus kind of connection stuff, and, you know, something that like I don't think anybody's kind of alluded to, but in a way, there's like kind of this kind of connection to AIDS that you can kind of see, right? Where, you know, if we kind of, you know, take it from the angle of like kind of where, you know, sex is like kind of, you know, the way it's kind of starts and stuff. You know, like a more recent kind of film that like definitely recommend is It Follows, where it kind of takes that to another level, where, you know, like kind of you literally by sleeping with somebody is how this kind of, you know, demonic kind of possession or, you know, curse is kind of passed on and stuff like that. And I think that's like kind of, it's interesting how that film came out more recently. And whereas, you know, I can't think, well, I mean, I think in the 80s and stuff like that, it was just basically another part of, you know, American horror was the idea that like, you know, when you sleep with somebody, you're going to get killed by Freddy or
Yeah, and it was either just like there was some unknown force that kills you, or there's something about the woman that you're sleeping with. Like in Life Force, if I remember correctly, she turns out to be like a vampire and sucks the energy out of people. But she is pretty hot, so you know, it's understandable. But there's that idea is I don't think that's too much of a stretch. The other thing I think as well, that's kind of interesting, is this idea of the influence of perhaps it being an analogy for radiation poisoning, because the name Sadako is synonymous with Sadako Sasaki, who was there was a little girl that survived Hiroshima, but then later died at the age of 12 from leukemia. Now, I could be wrong here, but apparently I think like the average time to survive from radiation poisoning is like 7 days. So again, you've got a kind of connection there. And another one in the novel that's interesting, if we're talking about like sort of US, you know, destroying things in Japan, is this idea of like the threat of US media on Japanese culture. Because in the novel, the statue that apparently the mother inherits these psychic powers from a statue that is from when Americans had occupied Japan.
Oh, wow.
So somehow, you know, they'd made that connection in the novel, which was kind of interesting. So yeah, I mean, there's a few different things you can kind of see maybe creeping in there.
Yeah, I think, you know, maybe now is like kind of a good time to kind of talk a little bit about the remake and stuff. That here in the 2002 version, a lot of the things are pretty much kind of carry over from the original. But unlike a lot of the remakes that we talk about, it's not a shot by shot, and they kind of do some pretty significant kind of twists and changes and stuff. Here we have again Naomi Watts from, of course, King Kong and stuff like that as the reporter, kind of mother, Rachel. And
we've watched a lot of movies with Naomi Watts. I feel like we've watched her entire back catalogue. But anyway,
and the thing that I feel like one significant difference, though, that like we're the culture kind of really is a striking difference, is that we see a lot of like angst and kind of we start off, of course, with the kind of like the teens here, like there's a lot of like teen angst you see stuff like that versus the what you see with the Japanese kids where they're kind of like just kind of like, oh, when you guys coming home kind of thing stuff. Instead it's like kind of like, oh, kind of there's the eye roll, stuff like that, like whatever, like kind of, like very much like kind of the things that we see in like kind of teen movies and just the American kind of stereotype, I guess, of teens and stuff.
Yeah, and I would say that the opening scene with the girls is very different in terms of mood. In that, what I think is really clever about that scene is that the way the dialogue's written in the Japanese one is that you don't know which of the girls, because they're both trying to kind of prank each other. You don't know which one actually watched the tape. Yeah. And you're there going, one of them's watched the tape, but is it this one or that one? Then you realize, obviously. But and they actually managed to bring that across. And what I actually kind of liked about the remake was that first scene, because I felt like actually there was going to be more jump scares, and they did it kind of very effectively. Like, she opens the fridge and you're kind of looking over her shoulder, and then there's the light, and then there's the static, and you're thinking, oh, this is maybe they're gonna subvert my expectations, and they did a little bit.
Right.
But then what's interesting is that doesn't get carried through to the rest of the movie. The rest of the movie then kind of follows the original kind of pace, which I think was a strange choice, really, to mix it up like that, because I think you could have just the pacing doesn't feel as even as it does with the original. And also, of course, they tell you all the stuff, they say 7 days left, 6 days left, and so
I think that's kind of one part of that is the director Gore Verbinski, he's kind of known for more like in your face kind of action, right? Then like I don't think he really did any other horror that I can think of or stuff like that. But he's known for like kind of the Pirates of the Caribbean series and stuff. And then we'll actually going to revisit him with the Walt Mitty, kind of as another kind of remake that he does and stuff like that. But other than that, like, most of the stuff, like, the other kind of film that's kind of somewhat known for, maybe a little bit notoriously, is Mouse Hunt, which is kind of like a more slapstick kind of, kind of in your face kind of comedy and stuff. So it's funny how like kind of that he's really not like kind of known for horror, and then plus like certainly like we like he said, the opening scene has kind of somewhat like subversion of expectations, but then other than that, like it kind of falls more back to the traditional horror kind of ideas and stuff. I think one other thing kind of worth noting apparently is that like he began shooting without a full script, so that was like another thing that like kind of so I think that may be kind of like telling him like kind of how some things kind of, for better or for worse, took some twists and turns.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing that I really noticed. I mean, obviously the storytelling is much more visual in the original, and this one has a lot more dialogue. And my main problem with this one is that they make Aiden the kid into like kind of almost like The Shining, the kid from The Shining, and that he's drawing and he's predicting the future, and then he's like, it's not her room anymore. Like, and
I thought
she's died.
I thought of Sixth Sense.
God. Yeah, exactly.
And that was like pretty much on people's minds, I think, as well.
Yeah, I don't think Gore Verbinski, maybe he's all right doing Pirates of the Caribbean, but he really doesn't direct these children very well because he just comes across as a kid acting like a weird kid rather than
I feel
it's actually spooky.
I feel like in a way that kind of, after Sixth Sense and stuff became a trope of like kind of the creepy kid, like kind of, you know,
Yeah.
that I think like every other horror movie has that, you know, again, as like key element and stuff.
And for me, it's like you could just have him drawing pictures and just behaving normally, and that would be creepy enough. You don't need to try and have him sort of staring weirdly at the screen with dark rings around his eyes, sort of going, "Mummy, you're going to die soon, Mummy," or whatever he said. You know, it's just like, come on. I kind of felt like, I don't know, it's weird. I suppose you could say both of the mothers, there's a kind of a judgmental angle on them. Naomi Watts' mother, I don't know, maybe it's just because it's in an American movie, it feels like it's kind of portraying her as a kind of a bad mother, really. She doesn't seem to have any time, and this kid just seems a bit sort of aloof and alienated, I guess. But
yeah, I feel like the kind of you know, mother struggling, you know, kind of with raising a child and stuff like that, it's very much more in your face in this one as well, because you know, like here, like, you know, I mean, different times, like she's like, you know, openly kind of this, like we're seeing a lot of the frustration, you know, kind of the mother and stuff, and it's yeah, definitely, you know, I think that's one of the key differences, that like we're seeing, like kind of going from the subtlety of you know, Ringu and stuff like that, to like kind of this like very much like, you know, oh, I want to show you, like kind of, you know, like and then the other thing is like kind of that moment where you know, she's playing like kind of the hip mother, right, and stuff. We were like, say, smoking with the teens and stuff. It was like very much like kind of like, okay, you know, like they want to show like kind of that she is a savvy kind of, you know, modern day woman kind of thing and stuff.
It's difficult because you don't really know very much about her as a journalist at that point, and you don't know that she's really desperate to sort of find out and would go to any lengths, or, you know, and it just kind of seems like she's just kind of like hanging out, having a cigarette with teenage girls. I didn't really immediately catch on to the fact that she was being kind of savvy and clever and trying to kind of get information out of them. So yeah, and I mean, if we get onto the actual video itself,
right,
like in the original, it's kind of it's not overproduced. It's quite kind of grainy VHS. Apart from the floating letters, that still looks a bit weird. You know, it looks quite kind of static, not, you know, creepy, but nothing over the top.
Right.
This one, it was so overproduced. You have spinning chairs and stuff like this, and horror effects.
Right.
You know, it's all like almost pristine, and it just looks like a music video that's kind of for like Nine Inch Nails or something. It just looked way over the top, really. But I mean, and then it just felt like it was trying too hard in that, oh, well, that's the ladder from this, and that's the chair that she sat on. She broke her nails on this. It's kind of like, okay. There's absolutely no mystery here. You've explained absolutely everything in the video to us. and I think that's like a trap in itself that the director shouldn't fall into, in that it's difficult, because the idea is that you as a director are making a video within a video that's supposed to be creepy, but then you spend a long time with your main protagonist scrutinizing that video. So the video stops becoming spooky to your audience because you've watched it too many times. It's been too poured over, you know? So it stops feeling...
I think one interesting kind of thing that's kind of connected to what you're saying was like how different times, like, you know, we would have these flashbacks of, you know, like kind of the video, like in other words, from her point of view, that like she's saying something, and then like, you know, we're kind of almost away, like not even like kind of trying to remember ourselves, which, you know, to me like would be more engaging, but like they actually literally show the footage and stuff like that. And I think, you know, like you said, it's kind of like goes back to the thing we've talked about with horror different times, that like, you know, less is more. And here, like, you know, they're very overtly, like, you know, kind of like, you know, do you make the connection that like, you know, this is that part of the you know, the creepy videos.
Hey idiots, this is that's what we're doing here. It's like, I mean, this insult the intelligence of the audience too much. And like I say, you know, they're counting down the days for you and say, only 3 days left. Ooh, you should be tense now. You know, it's just, and then it's kind of stuff like she's looking out over the balcony after she's watched it, and she's looking in all these hotel rooms, and there's TVs there. And you're supposed to think, ooh, if someone broadcast this, wouldn't it be terrible? It's like, you know, this is this impending threat, but it's so kind of, you know, you hit over the head with it quite a lot.
What did you think of the mystery itself? That like kind of where they kind of change things, right? Where like like
Yeah.
that like we find out about like kind of the the psychic kind of connection and stuff, and like the psychiatrist and everything like that. But here, like they show the kid as like kind of the footage of the kid being very much like kind of disturbing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I hate to keep hammering this movie, but for me
Sure.
that was another major misstep because Sadako is in the original is you only see glimpses of her in a sort of a blurred videotape, and it's only right at the very end that you actually see her. And even then she doesn't talk or anything. She's just an image. She's just basically an image, an image that creates unspeakable fear.
Right.
Whereas in this, they got her talking. She's talking about, oh, my daddy and mommy, and it's just like it just kills any of the tension and the fear that might come from that character. And I mean, the whole thing with the horses was just like, what the hell? Like, why do we need it? Why are we going to like
poor horse?
I know, right? It's like some weird action sequence with a horse committing suicide and getting churned up by a boat propeller. I mean, that was the most comical. It was
definitely dramatic. I mean, kind of, a huge action sequence, like kind of where, like, it couldn't have been easy to kind of shoot that where, like, you have a horse running end to end of a ferry and stuff like that. Like, kind of, I mean, I got to give him points for, like, kind of, and I feel like, in a way, like he was prepping for kind of like the Lone Ranger, or like kind of these other things yet to come and stuff.
Yeah, maybe he just got the deal for that, and he says, "I really got to get a good horse handler for my next movie."
right.
I don't know. It's funny because for me, like, horses are one of the least. If you put an animal inside a horror movie, horses are probably one of the least scary for me. I don't have no connotation with horses and fear or horror. I just think of them as something you ride on, and there's something sort of kind of clumsy about a horse on a boat that just sort of seemed vaguely comedic to me. It just totally missed the mark for me, and it just felt like padding. It felt like 10 minutes of my life I'm not going to get back that doesn't have anything to do with the story.
I feel like it's just more for the cringe factor because, like, I think for a lot of people, especially the female audience and stuff, horses, like, like, just what little girl doesn't want to have a pony ride that that ends up being a horse and stuff like that. And I feel like kind of that they really wanted to kind of like get that moment of kind of horror, right? And horror in the sense of like kind of like kind of disgust or kind of like wanting to kind of really kind of throw up kind of horror stuff like that, because here you have like kind of Naomi Watts and this apparently like kind of the girl who was the owner of the horse and stuff like that, kind of looking over and seeing like kind of this horrible kind of this poor horse, right, like kind of getting turned up by the propellers and stuff.
All I can think of is the mean kids at school when she goes back. And I'm like, hey, do you hear, like, Jennifer's horse? Jennifer's horse went mad, ran off a boat and got killed, got churned up by the propellers. Someone told me that. The evil part of me would probably find that quite funny. I think if I was more evil than I am. No, I wouldn't find it funny. Sorry. Yeah, I think the major difference for me as well that was interesting, that they obviously geared it for a US audience, was this idea of making the problem familial rather than supernatural. Because it's what's clever about the original is it has this kind of fear of technology mixed with this fear of the paranormal. So it's the doctor's tampering, Dr. Izuma tampering or trying to investigate the paranormal, and the problems that came about from that caused the whole problem in the first place. In this one, it's it's a mean dad basically kind of valuing horses over people and being a really abusive, terrible father in the process. So it's interesting that they think in order for a US audience to appreciate this more, it has to have a familial connection and everyone has to be sort of related somehow, like Naomi. I mean, I know that in the original as well, Asakawa is the cousin of the mother, Tomoko's mother in this one, but it's more implied that she has to go and investigate it because she is the cousin of the killed girl in the US version.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, yeah, it's just weird, this whole familial thing. And it's kind of like, it's just one of those kind of US movie tropes, I think, where we can't have anything without someone being connected to someone else as the bad guy. You know, you can blame George Lucas for that, but
no, no.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, speaking of, you know, like kind of the fathers like that, you know, coincidentally it's played by Brian Cox, who, you know, again, like, almost feel like this is like a meta circle within a circle, because here, you know, like kind of that's of course Hannibal Lecter from Manhunter stuff. So we have like all these kind of funny connections between this particular remake with these other remakes that we've talked about and stuff like that.
Yes, yes. If only there were more actors in it that we'd seen in other ones. But I mean, we've seen quite a lot with Naomi Watts as well. But,
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't think of anyone else in it that we've seen before. But yeah.
And what's striking about for me with one of the things he says though is that, like, you know, like, I mean, it's kind of like we kind of have these references to media in the other movie stuff, because here, you know, like in the original, it's like, you know, she's a reporter, and it's kind of this other aspect about all this is like kind of that's you know, what kind of starts this in a way that, you know, because like she's seeing the news and she's like kind of investigating as a story and stuff. And then we have this in this one, but here, like, you know, like, because we have the character, you know, that Brian Cox is playing, you know, Richard Morgan, that he's like kind of very much like blaming like kind of the media, right, for saying, you know, oh, was it, you know, with you reporters, you take one person's tragedy and force the world to experience it, you know, you spread it like sickness. So it's kind of very much a scathing kind of idea that like that, you know, the media is to, you know, very much to blame for kind of like what's kind of, you know, ultimately his like choice to, you know, kill his daughter or something like that, and you know, because that caused or that the wife, right, was kind of the one that, you know, was in such despair that she kind of, you know, like, kills herself and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, yeah, the kind of spooky island and talking to people. It's I much prefer the idea of, you know, in the original, them talking to the uncle, and he's sort of somewhat implicit in the killing by association,
right,
rather than kind of like a woman who's just sort of vaguely aloof for no particularly good reason in the remake. But I think the one thing we should say is the creepiest thing about Ringu is actually that it's based partly on a true story. There was, in the early 1900s, a Japanese doctor called Dr. Furukai, and he actually did experiments with clairvoyance and people, and wrote it in his book from 1931, Clairvoyance and Thoughtopathy, where he actually tried to get psychics to project their images onto photographs. And some of those photographs are pretty bizarre. And, you know, if you've noticed in the original, the idea that Shizuko predicts the eruption and then goes mad and kills herself, that is actually part of his story. He found a woman who accurately predicted an eruption, and then exactly the same thing happened. The media kind of called her a fraud, and she killed herself.
Right.
She didn't throw herself into the volcano, but she killed herself. So that part of the story is based on, well, alleged true events. But he was very much into this idea of trying to capture ghosts and prove sort of extrasensory perception. Right. So it sounds like a really interesting book. I really want to get it, but it makes this, it's a kind of a weird, creepy connection that when you start sort of delving into the story a little more.
Definitely. And speaking of kind of creepiness, it's interesting how, you know, like in this one, you know, Samara, like kind of, she's very much like kind of, you know, just looks directly like the Japanese version of the ghost and stuff like that. You know, like the long black hair and like kind of, you know, basically hang over her face and stuff. It's interesting how they kind of kept that.
Yeah. And I mean, that goes back to the 1700 story. That she's the ghost in that looks exactly the same as, you know, even the original sort of one from Ringu. So, yeah. And there's this weird sort of implied thing in the US remake that the adoption papers have Japanese all over them, like she's maybe a Japanese kid that's been brought to the States and has somehow, you know, brought her psychic powers with her or something like this. So, I mean, there's part of me that thinks that, though, that there's this idea that, you know, they want to be just heard, but surely there are easier ways for ghosts to get people to hear their story than going through all of this rigmarole. You know, it's a very roundabout, no pun intended, way of getting people to find where your body is buried and stuff like this.
Right. Yeah, and I think you know, kind of you know, what we're going to see over the next you know, few discussions is how it's you know, just basically this is it. This is the remake that kind of launched this kind of whole U.S. Trend of like kind of copying, you know, Japanese horror. In fact, I think that's kind of what really makes it this this thing, you know, if you will, is the fact that, like, you know, the U.S. caught on to the fact that, like, hey, we have these like you know, Japanese films that we can basically do remakes and stuff. So it's kind of this other cycle, if you will, that's kind of created, you know, like kind of where, you know, American films like kind of copy, you know, like kind of Japanese horror. And so in a way, you know, like what we have is kind of like what happened in the story writing course of like kind of, you know, that we're copying like kind of the videos of the Japanese horror and stuff.
Yeah.
Spreading it.
Very poetic, absolutely.
So, you know, we'll be covering the next few discussions. You know, of course, The Grudge, Dark Water. I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. I don't know if you think of.
One Missed Call.
One Missed Call, yes.
And Pulse or Kylo.
Oh, you're right.
The other one. It's Spooky October for Halloween.
There we go. So yeah, once again, thanks for watching. I'm John Cheng with Dan Edmonds, and we will show you another Japanese horror next time.